Back in August, my sister and I went to go see the national tour of Back to the Future the Musical. After the show, I found out that another friend of mine was also at the theater that night and had seen me post on Instagram about being there. They asked me how I liked it, and after I told them, they replied, "The moment I saw on Instagram that you were there, I thought, oh, they're gonna hate this." As we approach the end of 2024, I find myself reflecting back on all the theater productions I saw this year. The good, the bad, the hilarious, and the harrowing. And while necessary praise should be given to the best shows I saw this year, I want to pay public tribute to the most memorable show I saw this year. I've long held that the worst thing a work of art can be is forgettable, so I have a lot of respect for any production that can keep me thinking about it months after the fact. Now, of course, a production can be memorable for good or bad reasons, but even a show that sticks in my mind for its spellbinding poor quality deserves to be acknowledged to some degree. So here I am, being honest and saying that, of all the plays and musicals I saw in 2024, the one that I have returned to thinking about the most has been, and I am dead serious here, Back to the Future. Because here's the thing, friend who assumed I would hate the show, I didn't hate it. In fact, I came away pretty impressed with it. But you're right about one thing. Going into the show, I also assumed I would hate it. But it won me over. Marty McFly drove a DeLorean directly into my stupid brain, and for 4 months, I haven't been able to dislodge it. So this is a more editorial style video where I'm going to hash out 3 larger questions. Why did I assume I would hate Back to the Future? What led to me liking Back to the Future? And what does Back to the Future think is the purpose of a musical? As much as I didn't hate Back to the Future, I will acknowledge what is, to me, the worst moment in the show. The moment that seemingly confirmed my earlier doubt of its quality. It's the moment just before the first reveal of Doc Brown and the DeLorean, when Marty first enters the empty parking lot. The actor rolls out on his skateboard, and right on cue, the JCPenney logo appears on the LCD backdrop behind him. A direct reference to the JCPenney logo that appears in the background of the same scene in the film. And when a handful of audience members applauded that sign appearing, I did think to myself, I think I'm watching the death of art. Okay, let's back up. In order to explain why I thought I would hate Back to the Future, I have to first explain what I thought the show would be. It is not a fresh observation to say that there are a lot of Broadway musicals based on films nowadays. Just doing a basic survey of the last 10 seasons, from June 2013 to May 2024, there have been 101 musicals to debut on Broadway. Of those, a whopping 32, nearly a third, have been based on films. The per-season number fluctuates, peaking in the 2016-17 season with 5 out of 13 original musicals, but audiences attending Broadway in the last 10 seasons could be assured of around 3 to 4 film adaptations opening each year. But let's not get into a doom spiral about how every musical is unoriginal today. While TikTok may have popularized the term "movical," sidebar, I hate that term, burn it to ash. Musicals based on films is not a cohesive genre, no more so than musicals based on books, unless you're going to claim that Ragtime, Be More Chill, Camelot, and Carrie are all the same genre. See, when people say there are too many musicals based on films as a derisive critique of modern Broadway, they're usually thinking of a particular subset of adaptations. I don't think anyone decrying movie-based musicals would use their overabundance to say we shouldn't have shows like Billy Elliot, Once, Waitress, or How to Dance in Ohio. But emotionally, there's a difference between those examples and ones like Mean Girls, or King Kong, or Groundhog Day, or Tootsie.
Here's the sexually active man geeks.
Allow me to propose more accurate terminology here. It's not the film musical overrunning Broadway, it's the IP musical. IP is short for intellectual property, and an IP musical would be any musical based on pre-existing IP, where a general audience's knowledge of that source material is a major driver of interest in the new adaptation. Their purpose, beyond artistic success, is to create a new revenue stream for the creators or owners of the original IP. The producers of Waitress were not relying on some large crowd of die-hard Adrian Shelley fans to make up the bulk of audiences. But Mean Girls was transparently relying on fans of the film to drive ticket sales. Now, 2 quick caveats to this argument before I go any further. 1. This is a subjective categorization. Unlike the concrete existence of a film as source material, the determination of what counts as an IP musical relies on trying to guess the intentions of the producers, which are rarely stated outright. Certainly, any show heading to Broadway wants to make money, but few producers would say aloud that their intention is to capitalize on the goodwill of an extant fandom in a new, more expensive medium. So determining which projects count as IP musicals is a matter of some opinion. I have my list, you're free to disagree. 2, this video is not a screed against IP musicals, either that they shouldn't exist or that you shouldn't enjoy them. In the same way that not all film adaptations are bad, not all IP musicals are creatively inert. Shows like The Lion King, Shrek, or Legally Blonde are IP musicals that expanded on or evolved beyond their source materials in interesting ways. Still others, like Jersey Boys or Beetlejuice, may have intended to capitalize on an existing fan base, but managed to hook a generation of fans through the quality of the musical itself. And that's not even to point out all the failed counterexamples, the original musicals based on nothing that were nonetheless not very good. Plus, from a purely business perspective, IP musicals make sense for both producers and audiences. With 4 out of 5 musicals failing to recoup during their Broadway runs, adapting a source material with a built-in audience can help new musicals overcome the first few months of a run, in order to build up good press or word-of-mouth advertising, with the biggest IPs potentially relying on the original audience sustaining it all the way through its Broadway run. And for audiences, IP musicals guarantee a similar return on investment. A consumer is less nervous to pay $120 for tickets if they know in advance that this musical will at least share some DNA with another work of art they already like. So, on the whole, I don't blame audiences for turning to IP musicals, or producers for giving people what they want. Not to mention, the term IP musical isn't just for film adaptations, but would also include jukebox musicals, particularly those centered on still popular musical artists. For every Mamma Mia expanding its draw beyond just ABBA fans, there are pieces like The Cher Show, Tina, A Beautiful Noise, Ain't Too Proud, and MJ, musicals that arguably sell themselves on the merits of their original singers more than on the merits of the musical itself. Let's look at the 2018 Tony Awards season. 7 original musicals opened that year, of which 3 were based on films. But how many of them were IP musicals? 2 were based on movies and had the producers of the original films on the producing team for the adaptation. 2 were jukebox musicals based on popular singer-songwriters, 1 was based on an enormously popular TV show, and 1 of them was a revue cobbling together songs from extant, more famous Broadway musicals connected by a well-known director-producer. You can quibble with my classifications, but I would argue that fully 6 of the 7 original musicals to open that season were IP musicals. In fact, the only one that wasn't was the one that won Best Musical at the Tonys, The Band's Visit, which, fair, is based on a film, but one that the producers could not have possibly expected a general audience to already know about, being an Israeli film that made 1/10 as much at the box office as Mean Girls and spawned exactly 0 memes. Reconsidering the last 10 seasons, then, how many of the new musicals have been IP musicals? How many of them were created with the expectation that a general audience would enter the theater already knowing the source material and expecting the musical to reflect it? As mentioned, this is a subjective category since your mileage will vary on which source materials count as IP, but judging conservatively, of the 101 original musicals, I would classify 44 as IP musicals, more than 2 out of every 5 new musicals to open in the last 10 seasons. And while some of them found success on their own terms, Some Like It Hot, for example, managed to build up a fan base for itself, distinct from fans of the 1959 film, it still speaks to a sizable chunk of new musicals relying not on fans of musical theater for success, but on fans of other artists or artworks who want to see what they already like repeated back at them, but now with singing. And that, in short, is what I assumed Back to the Future the musical to be. No one is going to see this musical because they've heard it has a riveting story, or a catchy original score, or a meaningful moral. They're going to see it because the 1985 Robert Zemeckis film is one of the best adventure comedies of the 1980s. And let's be honest, if the tickets are going to cost $120 anyway, would you rather spend that money on an original musical about a long-ignored bisexual painter that is artistically fascinating but tonally inconsistent, or on a musical that you know for a fact will contain at least 30% jokes you already know the punchlines to? Given that calculus, again, I can't blame audiences for choosing the latter. So, in brief, I expected to hate Back to the Future because it seemed to be a work of art with no goal beyond referencing another better work of art. And even compared to other IP musicals, Back to the Future is pretty blatant in its reverence for the original film. Every single costume is replicated down to the threads, every iconic scene is repeated nearly line for line. Almost every regressive attitude from the 1980s is retained with the expectation that no one coming to see this show will be critical enough to call them out for the dated gender roles and incest comedy. As someone who believes in the theater as an avenue for creative storytelling, the success of a show as blatantly onanistic as this one is cause for some concern. Put it this way, if you're a food critic, you would be upset if you saw audiences praising a restaurant for reheating meals someone else made and serving them at 5 times the price. Especially when, to really hammer this home, 44 of the 101 restaurants to open in the last decade are aiming to do that. So, with that entire rant buzzing around in my head, I went to go see Back to the Future with my sister, and when that goddamn JCPenney logo popped up, I despaired. I despaired for the future of the musical as an artistic medium. Because what's the point of trying to craft an original, clever, boundary-pushing show when the average audience member will laugh just as hard for the nostalgic equivalent of jangling your keys in their face? Sorry, it's just... I know there will be people, including my sister, who really enjoyed the show despite never having seen Back to the Future the movie, who will respond to all of this with the same answer. You're overthinking things, get off your weird high horse about the beauty and complexity of the medium, and acknowledge that some people like big, impressive, simplistic spectacles on the stage. To use your ludicrous restaurant metaphor, not everyone likes eating at per se. Some people like Big Macs. And yeah, I do have to acknowledge that's true. But I reject the notion that complex narrative and visual spectacle have to be an either-or. There have been plenty of Broadway musicals that feature visual spectacle. Wicked, Great Comet, Water for Elephants, the 2013 Pippin revival, but these shows also aim to say something larger, with a strong book below the surface. But, the argument goes, if the IP musical can get by on surface alone, why bother adding anything underneath? The point is, as valid as the claim is that these musicals just want to entertain audiences, the true marker of an IP musical is a profound laziness. A sense that if the audience is coming in expecting to see what they already know, then you don't have to try to give them anything else. So, with all of that working against the show, why did I end up liking Back to the Future? Well, the show might be incredibly lazy in its book and music, but in production, it might be the hardest working musical in years. See, transferring a popular film to the stage might seem like the lazy route for creating a new musical, but the reality is that it requires way more technical work than you might expect. Not in the writing or music, necessarily. The ability to copy entire scenes from the source material can be a major crutch. But because of film and theater utilizing different tools and having different strengths, creating a stage production that looks and feels like the film it's based on can be really, really difficult. Take, for example, one of the most blatant examples of an IP musical in recent memory, Mrs. Doubtfire. Putting aside the question about the necessity of a man-in-a-dress comedy in today's culture, the original Mrs. Doubtfire seems at first glance to be a pretty easy work to adapt for the stage. It's set in the modern day, features no magical realism, contains a lot of memorable jokes, and provides a star turn for a comedic lead actor. But there's one big challenge with Mrs. Doubtfire, and that's the title character herself. Specifically, the immense prosthetic and makeup work to transform Daniel into Mrs. Doubtfire. Now, in the film, there's a slight suspension of disbelief employed as Daniel switches back and forth, taking the makeup on and off again rapidly, which works as a plot device in the film, but in practical terms, the Mrs. Doubtfire makeup takes much longer to apply in real life than just a few seconds, and can't just be slipped on and off so easily.
I think on a good day it would take 3 hours, 3.5. Bad day, 4 hours, 4.5.
Which is fine in a film, because you can film the scenes with and without makeup on separate days, then cut them together in the final edit. But theater doesn't work that way. Everything that happens on stage has to happen in real time. If Daniel has to change in and out of Doubtfire drag in 15 seconds, then the actor on stage has to actually make that quick change. So for as lazy as it might seem to just copy-paste the script of Mrs. Doubtfire and throw a few songs in, the practical work of building a prosthetic for the actor that can actually accomplish the seconds-long quick change that the film got to fake through editing, that's genuinely impressive work. Mrs. Doubtfire is a bad musical that flopped on Broadway and will likely be forgotten after the national tour ends, but costume designer Catherine Zuber, hair designer David Bryan Brown, and makeup designer Tommy Kurzman cannot be accused of taking the easy way out. Actually, when it comes to the work of translating a cinematic property to a live medium it was never intended to inhabit, I've already talked about another example on this channel before. In 2015, Cirque du Soleil debuted Toruk the First Flight, which successfully translated the computer-generated world of James Cameron's Avatar into a tactile, real-time medium. The show itself was uneven, and Cirque's history of using other people's IP is similarly mixed, but that doesn't negate the effort on display from Toruk's design team. The graphics team on Avatar designed the planet of Pandora without any care for whether it could actually exist, and then Cirque's designers, tasked with bringing this alien setting to life, succeeded in making it real. Relying on recognizable IP may be lazy from a marketing perspective, but from a craft perspective, it imposes a whole host of challenges that other film-to-stage adaptations don't have to worry about. Roger Corman's film The Little Shop of Horrors features the same plot as Ashman and Menken's musical, but the costume designs are entirely different. But audiences didn't all know the film by heart, and so didn't care that Seymour wasn't wearing his iconic hat and scarf combo. Even calling them iconic is a stretch. But if Marty McFly's underwear in Back to the Future the Musical is not bright purple, people would riot. So you better go out of your way to rebuild every costume from the film. And unlike dialogue, recreating costumes can't be done with copy and paste functions. You have to source the materials, color match pieces, make sure actors can dance in them and that they hold up to much more wear and tear than the film costumes had to. So the fact that they had even more technical challenges to overcome than the film, and they actually succeeded in recreating everything, it may not be the most original design work, but that doesn't make it unimpressive. And that doesn't even get into the most impossible part of replicating Back to the Future, which is unquestionably the DeLorean. Unlike Doubtfire, which only seems technically complex when you think about it for more than a few minutes, Back to the Future uses filmic special effects in a way that is obvious, impressive, and central to its appeal. It's a particular challenge in adaptation. So familiar is the visual design of the film, it actively works against any ability to adapt it for another medium. A Back to the Future stage show in which the audience is asked to suspend disbelief for the DeLorean and its associated special effects would be neutering its own appeal.
Back to the Future the Musical is all about spectacle. This isn't a few actors on a bare stage.
The only option, then, is to take this fundamentally impractical effect, explicitly designed to work in the medium of film, and somehow translate it to the stage in a way that looks and feels the same. It's an impossible task. So the fact that they achieved it...
I think a lot of that was looking at how to use layers of perspective to create the sense that the midground, which is effectively Marty in the car, is moving by having a foreground and a background behind it.
This is the aspect that turned me from a hater to a fan. The musical's greatest achievement is to make the technical aspects so unavoidably visible that you cannot possibly call the resulting production lazy. So much effort is on display, so many challenges executed with exacting precision, so much technical wizardry not seen anywhere else. So what if the resulting production has barely anything to say besides "remember this"? It's hard to call the show a failure when it succeeds so completely at the one thing it sets out to do. It puts the film on stage. Plenty of IP musicals seek to do exactly that, but Back to the Future was the first time that goal felt, to me, like a challenge rather than taking the easy route. So often I have derided new musical adaptations for relying heavily on other people's writing. School of Rock is content to play the hits from 2003 while sprinkling in bland rock songs. Pretty Woman can barely summon the effort to justify its dated gender politics. Diana, and yes, I would count that as an IP musical, Diana redefined its own terms of success by courting a legion of fans who cared more about replica costumes than about truly insipid lyrics. But as much as criticisms of weak writing are valid, it should also be remembered that costume designers are also artists. So are lighting designers, set designers, projection designers, hair and makeup designers, puppet designers. I mean, King Kong was another IP musical that set itself an impossible task at replicating cinematic source material and, despite odds, succeeded wildly, with designers Creature Technology Company winning a special Tony Award. There is just praise to be given to IP musicals that make significant deviations from their source material in order to work better within the language of theater. Consider the SpongeBob musical's revised humanoid character designs, or An American in Paris's incorporation of ballet into all aspects of storytelling outside of the dream sequences. But there is equivalent praise to be given to shows like Back to the Future, King Kong, or, I can't believe I'm saying this, Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark. Which, yes, for all of its confusing plot lines and confusing Bono songs and confusing mythology and confusion, set out to stage a scene where Spider-Man and the Green Goblin have a fight on wires above the audience, and then they did do that. The difference, of course, is that while many musicals may have had one knockout coup de théâtre effect, Back to the Future's effects may be more fundamental to the show than the script is. Without its technical effects, Back to the Future would not be able to communicate its story, and particularly its climax, at all. There is no defying gravity no-fly setup for Back to the Future if the tech doesn't work. The show placed all of its bets on the impossible goal of replicating the film on stage, and then did it, which is absurd, and it's not lazy. If you hate Back to the Future on principle as an IP musical, you should still find praise for Tim Hatley, Tim Lutkin, Hugh Vanstone, Finn Ross, Gareth Owen, Chris Fisher, and Campbell Young Associates. More than anyone else, this is their show. So, with all of that stated, let me bring things back down to earth and ask the necessary follow-up question: is that enough? Can a musical be so overloaded with spectacle that it actually outweighs the writing? As mentioned, so many IP musicals are simply jangling keys in front of the audience, hoping they'll be pleasantly distracted. And while Back to the Future may be the most complex, well-polished, laser-cut keys in existence, there's no denying that at the end of the day, it's still just a bouncing set of keys. Impressive as the effort on display is that enough to recommend that people pay premium prices to see them? Is that justification for producers to keep filling Broadway houses with ever more shiny keys? I want to answer this question, but before I do, I actually have to ask a different question first, one that I kept returning to after Back to the Future was over. It's not exactly why does this musical exist, it's more, why does this exist as a musical? You may have noticed that up to this point, I haven't mentioned the score of Back to the Future once. I've mostly focused on the technical elements, but I've still taken time to mention the book of the musical, which is almost entirely lifted from the 1985 film. And on one hand, I can kind of respect that. If people are coming to see the story and the characters they already know, there's not much point in writing new dialogue. Except then, every 5 to 10 minutes, you suddenly drop in a song that's completely new.
One more drama up against your head. To put you in a coma, you could end up dead.
See, if the goal of Back to the Future is to stimulate nostalgia for a film the audience already knows, then why bother adding songs? And don't say because it's a musical. That was not an inevitability. The decision to make this a musical was a decision. The thing is, if you had asked me this question even 10 years ago, I probably would have responded with something like, well, they're aiming for tourists. Tourists watch musicals more than they watch plays. It's the same reason that other IP expansions were also turned into musicals. A play adaptation of Rocky could have been perfectly serviceable, but the 2014 musical still felt the need to shove 20 original songs in the show. But why? Especially when the only songs people left humming were the two borrowed from the films. To cut straight to the chase, it's because, in the minds of most Broadway audiences, the term musical doesn't refer to form or structure, it's an adjective, synonymous with upbeat entertainment. Calling the show Back to the Future the Musical might as well be shorthand for Back to the Future, we promise you will have a fun time. But, as mentioned, that was the answer I would have given 10 years ago. Broadway has evolved since then. The IP musical has roots going back all the way to Breakfast at Tiffany's and arguably as far back as Lil Abner, but much more recent than that is the trend of the IP play. Now, this is new enough that there aren't nearly as many examples of it, but the trend was undoubtedly codified by... Damn it, I didn't want to talk about Joanne again on this channel.
You do not want to do this.
Yes, I do.
It is very easy to see the Harry Potter books as ripe material for musical adaptation, and I know that because it happened 3 times. But when it came to the official brand extension of the Wizarding World onto the stage, Harry Potter and the Cursed Child was a play, not a musical. So why is that? Well, I can't prove why the piece isn't a musical, but in my estimation, I think billing the show as a musical would have set the wrong tone. Again, recall that the word musical implies, for a general audience, the notion of having a fun, upbeat time. And while Cursed Child certainly wants to be entertaining, its tone is much more somber and important than something like Moulin Rouge or Diana or Back to the Future. Cursed Child also crosses over with the trend I previously discussed in my video 3 years ago on Life with Father. Many recent, long-running non-musicals on Broadway now feature the kind of spectacle typically associated with musicals, therefore making them more of a draw for general audiences than a living room drama would be. Warhorse, Curious Incident, Network, and Life of Pi may not have dance numbers, but they can promise a spectacle greater than other plays, greater even than some musicals. And if you don't want to see a musical, a spectacle play might coax you to the theater with the promise of a truly breathtaking experience. Sitting at the overlap of those two trends, recognizable IP and non-musical spectacle, it should be no surprise that Cursed Child recently passed 2,000 performances and is now Broadway's longest-running non-musical in 77 years. And coming up later this season, the obvious successor to Cursed Child is Stranger Things: The First Shadow, another high-budget, non-musical, special effect-laden, serious-toned British import based on an incredibly well-known visual media IP. But even if you want to keep the budget low and the cast size down, another IP play would be The Shark is Broken, a play which seems to have 2 goals: remind the audience that the film Jaws exists, and let Ian Shaw process his relationship to his father Robert Shaw. And as before, I'm not critiquing the concept of the IP play as inherently unworthy. In the same way that an IP musical can be a safe return on investment for audiences, so can a play that at least promises familiarity of subject matter. And, to their credit, all 3 examples given so far feature original stories, derived from a known work, but not simply adapting the same plot for the stage. But let's take all of this together and imagine a hypothetical. What if Back to the Future had been a play rather than a musical? What if the advertising angle had simply been, it's the film you love, but now you get to watch it happen in real time, right in front of you. Get your tickets now for the Back to the Future live theatrical experience. Honestly, advertised like that, I think I'd be on board. After all, that puts the focus exactly where I thought the show succeeded most. The impossible goal of replicating the film's groundbreaking special effects on stage in a manner that is similarly groundbreaking. It would be a gimmick, for sure, but I find myself less inclined to expect I would hate it. But the odd thing is, that kind of is the marketing angle that the musical went with.
What they do with the DeLorean is unreal. The way they've recreated it in actual DeLorean in many different ways is just as exciting as in the movie. Maybe even more so because it's right there. The reality of it is right in your face.
They were very masterful in trying to recreate the feeling for a lot of people who saw Back to the Future the first time back in 1985, and to recreate that experience for people who either seen it back in the day or who are seeing it for the first time.
When people are asking about wanting to see a Back to the Future Part 4 or a remake or something, what they're really saying is we want to feel the same way we felt the first time we saw Back to the Future, because that was such a special experience. And that is at the heart of Back to the Future, the musical.
I feel like the production is trying to hold 2 truths at the same time. You should see this show because it's exactly like the movie, but also it's more than the movie. Taking a hard look at this, I have to conclude that the root of my expected frustration with Back to the Future, the musical, is honestly the musical part. Why do I feel more protective of the medium of musical theater than I do for plays? And I think it gets back to that idea from before, the prevailing attitude that, for many casual audiences, the term musical is still an indication of tone or genre, more than it is a term of craft. To the audience member who doesn't go to see more than 1 or 2 musicals every year, but who comes to see Back to the Future because they've heard of the film, the utter pointlessness of the songs gets justified on the grounds that that's how musicals work. You take a story that worked perfectly fine without songs, and you add songs in whenever people start to get bored.
Our director, John Rando, and the design team really tried to kind of recreate the first part of the Back to the Future series. And so we do basically that story, and we've added, of course, a bunch of songs that are sort of new songs and wonderful songs with Alan Silvestri and Glenn Ballard.
And before I follow my impulse to absolutely demolish that argument and go off on a long tangent about songs in musicals arising from emotional peaks and how song structure can be just as important to storytelling as lyrics, before I get completely lost up my own ass, I should acknowledge that that earlier perspective on musicals isn't unprecedented. In fact, it's extremely precedented. Before, say, the 1940s, that's exactly how musicals worked. Just as I could cite Sondheim and Tessori and Jackson and Miranda to argue that songs in musicals need to have a narrative purpose, my straw man audience member could just as easily cite Rodgers and Porter and Berlin and Herman. Musical theater as a medium has, speaking conservatively, only existed for a little over a century, and for about half of that, songs weren't expected to do anything but entertain. And plenty of modern musicals have found success arguing that they still don't need to serve any other purpose. Putting this in the terminology of the IP musical, for some audiences, songs are just another spectacle, another set of keys to shake. Perhaps that's what still frustrates me so much about Back to the Future. For as groundbreaking as its design work is, at heart it holds an incredibly regressive perspective on its own medium. It is a musical that doesn't really understand why musicals have songs, except that audiences seem to like them as pleasant distractions. But in a show already spilling over with pleasant distractions, from the technical effects to the quote-filled script, why add these new unexpected songs? The craziest thing is, I think Back to the Future knows this. I wanted to track how much the musical relies on its 17 original songs to bring in audiences, versus the 4 imported from the film franchise. So, this is an inexact measurement, but I scrolled back through every Instagram post made by the Broadway production and counted every post that included a song from the film versus a song exclusive to the show. The final total, across 2 years of advertising, songs exclusive to the musical appeared just 16 times. And most of those weren't clips of the show itself, but from marketing performances at places like Good Morning America, The View, the Macy's Parade, Broadway Con, Playbill Pride, and one music video featuring Roger Bart.
Yes, this one's for the dreamers.
Meanwhile, the rest of the posts are filled with constant repetitions of 3 songs from the film: The Power of Love, Back in Time, and Johnny Be Good. And I know the response from people will be, well yeah, of course they're going to advertise the songs from the movie, people know them. Which, yes, sure, but if your main selling point for this musical is featuring 3 songs you know, then why did you write 17 new ones that you're barely acknowledging? It can honestly be a little infuriating to watch interviews with Bob Gale, co-writer of the film and book writer of the musical, talking about how the show went from idea to reality and completely skipping over the question of why a musical, as though it's just a given that this would be the format.
When you come to the theater and you have the communal experience, experiencing this story with 1,000 or 2,000 other people who are all laughing, who are all applauding, it's energizing. It's an adrenaline rush. It's funnier to watch it with an audience than it is to watch it at home.
Yeah, Bob, people want to experience the film with an audience. You do realize that doesn't necessarily require dance sequences, right? Not to mention, across all of the audience testimonials praising the show, they do not mention the score even once. Well, I tell a lie. One person in 2023 mentioned the music. from the film.
When I heard it was coming to Broadway, I was so stoked. The music is obviously amazing in the movie, and I am so excited to see kind of how they put that musical theater twist to it.
Edit. Literally, as I was finalizing the script, their Instagram posted a new reel about 5 reasons to see the show, and the very first one is the new songs. So, chalk 1 up for the account. It managed 1 endorsement of its original score in 2 years of marketing. This is why I think Back to the Future would have been better served by a non-musical adaptation, at least in my view. In a post-Cursed Child world, it's hard to argue that audiences would stop coming if the songs were removed. If it were an arena spectacular that sold itself on the novelty of watching the film happen in real time and in person, I could judge it solely on the quality of its technical magic and shrug it off as an impressive showcase of theatrical artistry. Much in the same way that I half-heartedly endorsed Toruk while dismissing its story. And listening to interviews with the design team, that does appear to be the target they were aiming for.
This cinematic masterpiece done in a theatrical, three-dimensional way.
But the magic for me is people not quite knowing how we do it.
You can feel when they're tight and when they're with you, and you can feel them kind of lift at the end as the car vanishes.
You can't actually work miracles, but what you can do is make the audience believe in miracles.
Yeah, and we pulled it off.
But by adapting the film into a musical, I feel compelled to judge the show on the terms of what I consider a good musical. And through that lens, Back to the Future is not good. There's a persistent sense of obligation, the recursive idea that the songs exist because musicals have songs, and it's a musical, so songs must exist. But the larger problem is, speaking honestly, I don't think many audiences care. I'll go further. Despite the maturation of the medium across the latter half of the 20th century, my perspective on what a musical is may still be in the minority. My take on Back to the Future is that it is a musical that disrespects what the medium of musical theater is all about. But for a general audience, Back to the Future represents precisely what the medium of musical theater is all about. In fact, for them, it may represent the absolute pinnacle of what a musical is supposed to be. So then, returning to before, is this enough? Can I rightly praise Back to the Future as a marvel of artistry in scenic and costume design if that creative work is in service of a musical that denigrates its very medium? Can I applaud the component parts while having such a revulsion to the intentions of the whole? I don't know. And it's because I continue not to know that I've kept thinking about Back to the Future the musical for the last 4 months. It is an undeniable artistic triumph and a milestone in theatrical design. It is a wad of spit in the face of the performance medium I love the most. It's a signifier of how far the Broadway musical has come and how little it has changed. A production that is aiming towards the future while being unwilling to move on from the past. I still feel like I should hate it. I can't bring myself to. All I can say is this, and you can decide for yourself if this is a statement for or against the show. To paraphrase George Orwell, if you want a picture of the future of musical theater, imagine an audience applauding the J.C. Penney logo. Forever. Alright, I'm doing one take of this and no more. Jeez Christ. Jesus Christ, Doc, you disintegrated Einstein! Calm down, Morty, I didn't disintegrate anything! The molecular structure of both Einstein and the car are completely intact! Where the hell are they? The important question is, when the hell are they? You see, Einstein has just become the world's first time traveler! I can send him into the future! 1 minute into the future, to be exact! And at precisely 1:21 a.m. in 0 seconds, we shall catch up to him in the time machine. Wait a minute, Doc. You're telling me you built a time machine? That is a DeLorean? The way I see it, if you're gonna build a time machine into a car, why not do it with some style? Okay, so I'm gonna cut all that together.